536 AD, the year the sun disappeared. Historians call it the worst year to be alive in human history. Not 1918 with the Spanish flu, not 1349 with the Black Death, not even 2020. 536 AD. In early 536, a massive volcanic eruption, likely in Iceland, ejected so much ash into the atmosphere that it blocked out the sun. Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia were plunged into 18 months of darkness. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote, "The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon." Cassiodorus, a Roman senator, recorded, "We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon." Imagine that, standing in what should be blazing sunlight. No shadow, just dim, eerie twilight, for a year and a half. Summer temperatures dropped by 2.5 degrees Celsius across Europe. Crops failed worldwide. The Irish chronicles record a failure of bread from 536 to 539. Snow fell in China during summer. Millions starved. But wait, it gets worse. In 540, another massive volcano erupted, this time in El Salvador. Then another in 547. This initiated the late antique Little Ice Age, which lasted from 536 to around 660, over a century of cold. Then, in 541, bubonic plague struck. What came to be called the Plague of Justinian wiped out 1/3 to 1/2 of the Eastern Roman Empire's population. Over 100 million people died worldwide. Medieval historian Michael McCormick calls 536 the beginning of one of the worst periods to be alive, if not the worst year. One volcanic eruption, 18 months of darkness, a century of cold, a plague pandemic, the collapse of the Roman Empire. And you probably never learned about it in school. The Black Death, 1347 to 1353, when half of Europe died. In October 1347, 12 ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina. People gathered on the docks were met with horror. Most sailors were dead, and those still alive were covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus. Sicilian authorities ordered the death ships out of the harbor. Too late. Over the next 5 years, the Black Death would kill more people proportionally than any pandemic in recorded history. Between 45 to 50% of Europe's population died. An estimated 25 million people between 1347 and 1351. Some historians believe 60% of Europe's population was wiped out. The disease was caused by Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas on rats. But people in 1347 didn't know that. They thought it was divine punishment. Poisoned air, an astrological alignment, Jews poisoning wells. At least 235 Jewish communities were massacred during the Black Death in futile attempts at plague containment. Entire communities burned alive based on rumors. The symptoms were horrific. Swellings in the groin or armpits grew to the size of apples, filled with blood and pus. These were followed by fever, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, terrible aches, then death within days. The disease was terrifyingly contagious. Italian poet Giovanni Boccaccio wrote that the mere touching of the clothes appeared to itself to communicate the malady to the toucher. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Paris buried 800 dead per day at its peak. Florence lost 50,000 of its 85,000 people to EBSCO. Mass graves held hundreds or thousands of bodies. Medieval medicine was creative. Plague doctors wore protective clothing with long capes and bird-like masks filled with aromatic substances. An early hazmat suit meant to block the miasma. Popular cures included strapping a live plucked chicken to your sores, rubbing cut-up snakes on boils, because snakes were evil like the plague, eating crushed emeralds, drinking mercury or arsenic. None of it worked. Groups called flagellants marched through Europe, whipping themselves bloody, believing self-punishment would appease God. They also massacred Jews wherever they went. The Black Death broke European society. With a labor shortage, surviving peasants demanded higher wages. The feudal system began to collapse. A new middle class emerged. It took 200 years for Europe's population to recover to pre-plague levels. The Black Death killed more people percentage-wise than any war, any famine, any disaster in human history. And it kept coming back for centuries. World War I, 1914 to 1918, the war that destroyed a generation. They called it the war to end all wars. It didn't. World War I killed more people than any conflict in human history up to that point, an estimated 20 million dead, with another 21 million wounded. But the numbers don't capture the horror. This was the first industrial war. Machine guns, poison gas, artillery that could level entire towns, tanks, airplanes dropping bombs. The Western Front became a 400-mile-long graveyard, stretching from Belgium to Switzerland. Trench warfare meant soldiers lived in muddy ditches filled with rats, lice, and corpses. They went over the top into no man's land, the space between trenches, where machine guns cut them down by the thousands. At the Battle of the Somme in 1916, 19,240 British soldiers died on the first day. The first day. By the battle's end, over 1 million men were dead or wounded, for 10 kilometers of territory. Poison gas was used for the first time. Chlorine gas, mustard gas, phosgene. Men drowned in their own fluids as their lungs dissolved. Shell shock, what we now call PTSD, left hundreds of thousands of men psychologically destroyed, shaking uncontrollably, unable to speak, haunted forever. The war consumed an entire generation of young men. France lost 1.4 million soldiers. An entire cohort of French men simply vanished. Germany lost 2 million. Britain lost nearly 1 million. Russia lost 1.8 million. Small towns sent their young men to war. Many of those towns lost every single one. But World War I's deadliest weapon wasn't a gun or a bomb. It was a virus. The Spanish flu, 1918 to 1920, when a virus killed more than the war. The trenches of World War I created the perfect breeding ground for disease. Millions of soldiers living in close quarters, poor sanitation, malnutrition, stress. Then those soldiers returned home, carrying a virus with them, the Spanish flu. Between 50 and 100 million people died worldwide, more than died in World War I itself. An estimated 500 million people were infected, 1/3 of the world's population at the time. What made the Spanish flu particularly terrifying, it killed young, healthy adults. Most flu viruses kill the very young and very old. The Spanish flu's mortality curve looked different. It killed people in their 20s and 30s at rates never seen before or since. The symptoms were horrific. Victims would develop heliotrope cyanosis, their skin turning blue, then purple, then black, as their lungs filled with fluid and they suffocated. Some victims drowned in their own blood as their lungs hemorrhaged. Death came quickly. People could be healthy in the morning and dead by nightfall. Bodies piled up so fast that cities ran out of coffins. Mass graves were dug. Undertakers couldn't keep up. In Philadelphia, 4,500 people died in 1 week. Bodies lay in homes for days because there was no one to collect them. In India, 17 million died. The virus spread so fast that some remote villages in Alaska were wiped out completely. Every single person dead before anyone outside even knew they were sick. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the Spanish flu vanished. By 1920, it had burned through the population, killing everyone vulnerable and leaving the survivors immune. World War I and the Spanish flu, back to back, killed over 70 million people in just 6 years. An entire generation gone. World War II, 1939 to 1945, humanity's darkest hour. If World War I was hell, World War II was hell industrialized, mechanized, and globalized. Between 70 and 85 million people died, roughly 3% of the world's population, more than any other conflict in human history. But raw numbers can't capture the systematic evil of World War II. This was the war of the Holocaust, the deliberate industrial murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of Roma, disabled people, homosexuals, and political prisoners. Gas chambers, concentration camps, human experimentation, genocide as policy. The rape of Nanking. Japanese forces massacred between 200,000 and 300,000 Chinese civilians in 6 weeks. Mass executions, beheading contests, systematic rape, bodies thrown into rivers until they clogged the waterways. The Siege of Leningrad. Nazi forces surrounded the Soviet city for 872 days. Over 1 million civilians starved to death. People ate wallpaper paste, leather, sawdust, and each other. The atomic bombs. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In seconds, over 200,000 people vaporized or burned alive. Thousands more died slowly from radiation poisoning. The Eastern Front, the most brutal theater of the war. The Battle of Stalingrad alone killed 2 million people fighting over a single city. Soviet and German forces fought house to house, room to room. The life expectancy of a newly arrived Soviet soldier was 24 hours. World War II introduced carpet bombing, deliberately targeting civilian populations to break morale. Dresden, Tokyo, London. Entire cities burned. It introduced total war. Every person, every resource mobilized for killing. The war ended only when 2 atomic bombs proved humanity had created weapons that could end civilization itself. World War II killed 3% of humanity and showed us we're capable of industrial-scale evil. We built factories for murder. We turned science into genocide. We ended the war with weapons that could destroy the world. The Mongol conquests, 1206 to 1368, 40 million dead. While medieval Europe struggled with the Black Death, the Mongol Empire was carving the largest contiguous land empire in human history. At its peak, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, 24 million square kilometers. How did a nomadic people with no cities, no written language, and no industry conquer half the known world? Terror. Calculated, systematic, industrialized terror. Genghis Khan's strategy was simple. Cities that surrendered peacefully were spared, but still taxed heavily. Cities that resisted were annihilated. And when the Mongols said annihilation, they meant every living thing. When Urgench in modern Uzbekistan resisted, the Mongols diverted a river to flood the city. Then they killed everyone, an estimated 1.2 million people. When Baghdad resisted in 1258, Mongol forces killed between 200,000 and 1 million people. The Tigris River ran black with ink from destroyed books and red with blood. The Islamic Golden Age ended there. The Mongols had a policy. If you killed a Mongol envoy, they would erase your civilization. Estimates suggest the Mongol conquests killed 40 million people, 11% of the world's population at the time. But here's the thing. The Mongol peace that followed connected East and West in unprecedented ways. The Silk Road became safe. Trade flourished. Ideas spread. Paper money, gunpowder, the printing press. The Mongols killed 11% of humanity, but also created the conditions for the Renaissance. Terror and progress, inseparable. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, Europe's forgotten apocalypse. Most people have never heard of the 30 Years' War. They should. It killed approximately 8 million people, roughly 20% of the Holy Roman Empire's population. Some regions lost 50% of their population. It started as a religious war between Catholics and Protestants. It ended as a power struggle between European kingdoms that devastated Central Europe. What made the 30 Years' War so horrific wasn't just the battles. It was the mercenary armies. These weren't national armies fighting for their country. These were roving bands of soldiers for hire who survived by plundering whatever town they occupied. Villages were burned, crops destroyed, civilians massacred or left to starve. Famine killed more people than combat. The war introduced systematic scorched earth tactics. Armies would deliberately destroy everything in a region: farms, food stores, livestock, leaving nothing for the enemy, or for the civilians caught in the middle. Contemporary accounts describe people eating grass, bark, and corpses. The war finally ended with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which established the modern concept of nation-states and sovereignty. But Central Europe took a century to recover. Entire regions were depopulated. Some towns ceased to exist. The economic devastation lasted generations. The Columbian Exchange, 1492 to 1600s. 90% of a hemisphere dead. In 1491, the Americas had somewhere between 50 and 100 million indigenous people. By 1600, 90% were dead. Not from war, not from slavery, from disease. When Christopher Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, he didn't just find a new world. He opened a portal that would kill more people than any war in history. Europeans brought diseases the Americas had never seen: smallpox, measles, typhus, influenza, bubonic plague. Indigenous Americans had no immunity, no genetic resistance, no medical knowledge of these diseases. Entire civilizations collapsed. The Aztec Empire fell not because Cortez was a military genius with 600 men. It fell because smallpox killed half of Tenochtitlan before Cortez ever attacked. The Inca Empire was torn apart by European diseases before Pizarro arrived. Tribes that never saw a European died by the thousands from diseases spread by trade networks. Some estimates suggest 55 million indigenous people died in the century after 1492. The death toll was so massive that it changed the planet's climate. Millions of acres of farmland returned to forest. Trees absorbed so much carbon dioxide that global temperatures dropped, the Little Ice Age of the 1600s. The Columbian Exchange was the greatest demographic catastrophe in human history.